Hi again and welcome back. In this video we're going to be learning about perfect participles, the last tense of participles that we'll need to learn. If you remember, there are several components that make together a participle. There's the stem, the verbal stem, which is sometimes followed by a tense marker. Often with the aorist it was a sigma. Then there's a connecting vowel and a voice indicator, which is unique to participles, indicating whether this participle is an active or a middle passive voice. And at the end, then we had the case endings, either third declension or first declension, or in some cases second declension and first declension. So we get resulting forms like lusantos, epomeno, and enenkusane. Here are the components of a first perfect active participle. We have the verb stem, but notice that, like with other perfect verbs, we have the verb stem with reduplication. Or in some cases, we would have not standard reduplication, but other kinds of stem change. The reduplication here, unlike with me verbs, is performed with the epsilon vowel. So lelu becomes the stem for luo. The tense marker here is kappa. The connecting vowel is either omicron in the masculine and neuter or upsilon in the feminine. And then we have very short voice indicators for the perfect. Instead of the nun tau that we had with the aorist and present, we just have the tau. The nun has disappeared. And instead of the regular S voice indicator for the active feminine, which was epsilon sigma, now we just have an iota for the feminine. But the case endings added on the end are the same as before. And so we have forms like lelukautos and leluquias. Here's a full example of all the forms of the first perfect active participle for luo in the singular number. So the nominative masculine singular is lelukos, the genitive is lelukautos, dative is lelukauti, etc. One of the things we can notice is that in the first perfect participle, the kappa tense indicator is there throughout in each form. Following that kappa tense indicator, you can see we have our appropriate connecting vowels, either omicron for the masculine and neuter, or upsilon in the feminine. Then we have our voice indicators, either tau in the neuter and masculine, or iota in the feminine. And then there are just a couple of places where the voice indicators disappear and collapse, and the connecting vowels do something slightly unusual. In the nominative masculine singular, the connecting vowel omicron lengthens to an omega, and so we have an os ending instead of an ot ending of some kind. And since the nominative masculine singular for third declension nouns is the same as the vocative often, lelukos is also the vocative form. That's one that you just have to memorize. But lelukos in the neuter nominative singular is also a little bit unusual. There the connecting vowel hasn't lengthened. It's a regular short omicron. But the sigma is not typical of the neuter. We would expect something like lelukon, wouldn't we? But here, the os ending, we have to remember, is the sign of the neuter, where the os ending is the sign of the masculine. In the genitive and dative, both the neuter and the masculine are exactly the same, lelukautos and lelukauti, but because the neuter uses the same form for the nominative, the accusative, and the vocative, in the accusative, we return to lelukos and lelukos again. So just remember those perfect voice indicators disappear in the nominative masculine and neuter singular, and then the other cases that reuse the nominative singular forms. The accusative and vocative for the neuter, and the vocative for the masculine. As with other participles, we can see that we have regular third declension endings in the masculine and neuter, and regular first declension endings in the feminine. And in the feminine singular here, because we have the upsilon iota diphthong, we, Greek speakers felt it easier to add an alpha after the we. So instead of using eta endings in the singular, we use alpha endings for the first declension in these first perfect active participles. That gives us the forms leluquia, leluquias, leluquia with a iota subscript, and leluquion, and then leluquia again for the vocative. It's important to keep in mind the different feminine voice indicators that are used for the active voice in each different tense of participle. And we saw before how the present, the aorist active, and the aorist passive all use the voice indicator S for the active feminine. And the differences between the actual endings are a symptom of what happens when the connecting vowel runs into the epsilon at the beginning of the voice indicator. So the omicron of the present tense meets the epsilon of the voice indicator, and we end up with a combined form us, as in luusa. In the aorist active, the alpha of the connecting vowel meets the epsilon of the voice indicator, and the epsilon is overpowered by the alpha, and we just end up with the combined form as for the feminine active connecting vowel and voice indicator. For the aorist passive, it was an epsilon connecting vowel, which met the epsilon of the voice indicator, and they combined to form the diphthong ae, epsilon iota, and so we ended up with the combined form ace. It's in the perfect that things get weird, because here we have the connecting vowel upsilon, and now we don't use that S voice indicator anymore. We just use an iota, and that gives us the combined form we. And that we diphthong is very, very typical of and distinctive of the feminine active participles, perfect participles. So if you see a wea type ending, you can be fairly sure that you're dealing with an active perfect participle. Here are examples of the plurals. Again, this is quite regular. We have the kappa tense indicator, the omicron or upsilon connecting vowel, and either the tau or the iota active voice indicator. And then onto those, we just add the regular third declension or first declension plural endings. The two places that we want to be careful of are in the dative plural for the masculine and the neuter. The dative plural third declension ending, of course, is C or seen, and when that is added after the cot and the tau voice indicator, that tau drops out, and so we just get, instead of cot C, we get cos C. And so we have lelucosi as the masculine dative plural, and lelucosi as the neuter dative plural. But the endings, as I said a moment ago, are completely regular, even more so than in the singular of the perfect active participle. Here we just have in the masculine and neuter the regular third declension plural endings, and in the feminine the regular first declension plural endings. The only thing to watch is that the masculine nominative uses the S plural ending, and the neuter nominative uses the A, the alpha plural ending, which is typical of many neuter nouns when they're in the third declension plural. And again, that lelukata ending shows up again in the accusative and the vocative. The components of a perfect middle passive participle are actually quite simple. We begin again with the perfect verb stem, which usually involves reduplication, but there's no tense marker in the middle and passive and no connecting vowel. We go directly to the voice indicator men and then add on the case ending u. So the only components that actually show up in these perfect middle passive participles are the verb stem, the voice indicator, and the case ending. That gives us the genitive singular forms lelumenu and lelumenes. Here's an example of all of the forms for the perfect middle passive participle. Lelumenos in the masculine nominative singular, and then all of the regular second declension masculine endings are added onto lelumen. And similarly in the neuter, we have all of the regular second declension neuter endings added on, beginning with lelumenon, lelumenu, etc. In the feminine, we still have the first declension endings, but now with the men voice indicator, that's followed not by alpha class endings in the singular, but by eta endings in the singular. And so we have lelumene, lelumenes, lelumene, lelumenane, and lelumene again in the vocative. These are all quite regular endings, and so there are no tricks at all, really, with the perfect middle and passive participles. In the plural forms, we get lelumenoi, lelumeni, lelumena in the nominative. And again, once we remember that we're just adding the men voice indicator and the case ending onto the stem, these are quite easy to put together. And all of these plural forms are completely regular, exactly what we would expect. The important thing, again, is just to remember that in the middle and passive participles, we switch in the masculine and neuter from the third declension to the second declension. So the middle passive participles use endings that are 2, 1, 2, second declension in the masculine, first declension in the feminine, second declension in the neuter, while with the perfect active participles, we had endings that were 3, 1, 3, third declension in the masculine and neuter, and first declension in the feminine. So what is the meaning of the perfect participle, whether it's active or middle passive? Really, we just have the regular participial uses with the added element of the perfect aspect on the action. So if we were to have an adjectival participle, ha lelumenos, that's a substantive participle, we might translate that the one who has been loosed. You notice that the has, they're used in the translation to indicate that idea of a past action with continuing present consequences. But aside from that, there's nothing surprising about that translation of an adjectival substantival participle. He beblequia gune. Here, beblequia, the perfect participle, is being used to modify gune as an adjective. And so again, we just need to add in the helper word has to give a typical translation. This is the woman who has thrown, beblequia from balo. For adverbial participles, we still want to think in terms of all of the different kinds of adverbial relationships that we had when we were learning about aorist participles. So we can have participles that are causal, temporal, purposive, concessive, etc. But we still want to add in that has helper word in the English translation to remind ourselves that the perspective on the action is slightly different now. There's not just a plain presentation of the action, but the action's being viewed as specifically past with ongoing effects. So, eleleuthos from erchomai could mean because he has come. Bebaptismene, if it's temporal, could mean after she has been baptized. Keklemenos, if it's purposive, could mean so that he has been called. Leluquia, if it's concessive, could mean although she has released. And something similar could be put together for any of the different kinds of adverbial participles that we've learned before. There is a second perfect participle, but once you've learned the first perfect participles, these are extremely easy. All you have to do is remember to leave off the kappa tense indicator, which was the only signal of the second perfect in the indicative mood as well. So we have the regular perfect stem of the verb, in this case, eleleuth from erchomai, and then we just add on, instead of kappa, add on directly the connecting vowel, the tau or iota voice indicator for the active, and the regular case endings. And there are the same irregularities here in the nominative masculine and neuter, os and os, the same irregularities that we saw with first perfect active participles. Again, with plural forms, all we do is add exactly the same components and endings that we added for the first perfect active, but leave off the kappa tense marker. You can learn more about perfect participles in Greek in Mounce's Basics of Biblical Greek, 3rd edition, and I've given you the section and page numbers there.